Welcome to the Impact Learning Visionaries podcast, where we celebrate the unsung heroes of the learning and development industry. As always, we'll be bringing some laughter and a bit of fun along the way, but more importantly, you'll get some incredible insights, key lessons, and unique perspectives on everything related and possibly unrelated to training and development. Let's get this show on the road. Welcome everybody to the Impact Learning Visionaries podcast. Joining me today, we have Zainab Hafiz, who is no stranger to organizational learning strategies. As a talent development leader, she has a wealth of knowledge and experience in change management, learning design, and delivery across various industries and global organizations. Zainab is the Learning and Development Manager at Capritino Electric, where she is responsible for guiding her team towards creating engaging, impactful, and personalized learning programs. She's passionate about creating a culture of learning and leveraging the power of technology to achieve her organization's training and development goals. Zainab, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
All right, let's jump right in. So tell the audience, and I'm particularly interested in hearing a little bit about your background, how you came to be where you are right now, some of the trials, tribulations, lessons, hard knocks, just tell us a little bit about yourself and we'll take it from there.
Okay. I always had this feeling like I wanted to be a teacher, or I liked to teach, but I also knew that I was not interested in being a classroom teacher. So I didn't want to teach children necessarily or be in a classroom. And so that was kind of in the back of my mind, that I knew that I was good at this thing, but I wasn't sure what that would mean later. I fell into learning and development through becoming a facilitator for electronic medical record systems at Kaiser Permanente. So prior to that, in a previous life, I was an optician. I was a general manager for LensCrafters locations in Northern California. And I was kind of zigzagging through life trying to figure it out. Prior to that, I was working with kids in for-profit education, after-school education, kind of zigzagged around. At Kaiser is really where I fell into sort of a love for learning development. So I was facilitating courses on the medical record software, and I was just fascinated with, like, how do we make these manuals? How do we know who needs what training? How is the sausage made to get to this point where I can now go and deliver this? And that curiosity was really nurtured. I was really grateful for that opportunity at Kaiser, because they were like, hey, there were classes on how we build our books, how we build our manuals, and things like that. They were interested in sharing, and so I started kind of following that curiosity. And I had a leader who just reached out and said, hey, you're really, you're good at this, like you have a knack for this, and are you interested in also doing some instructional design? And I was like, what is instructional design? Apologies for the roommates.
Oh no, that's amazing right there. That's like gate crashing. I love it.
Cameos. That's apologies. Yeah, I think my career has really been just being led by my curiosity. So I fell into instructional design at Kaiser. I was doing both. I was facilitating and I was creating learning. That's where I really got into understanding how the sausage is made there particularly. And then I started to do more sort of background conceptual learning, taking some classes on what is e-learning design, what is instructional design. I was really interested in it. And I realized that I wanted to follow that. And I initially thought I would go and just maybe get a master's in learning technology or something like that. And I always had this dream to work abroad. I'm actually an immigrant, so I was born in Saudi Arabia. I'm Pakistani. I came to the States when I was very young, so I always had this idea. I'm an expat kid, so I had this idea that I would eventually be an expat. And when I started to look into what my next step would be, my leader at Kaiser actually just announced he was leaving and moving to Abu Dhabi to lead a project there, a training project there. That was a whole implementation of, it was a brand new digital hospital that we were building, Cleveland Clinic Abu Dhabi, and he was responsible for training all of the software applications for the entire hospital prior to opening. And so it sounded amazing. I reached out to him and I said, if you're building a team, you should consider me. And he did. I was the first hire. He brought me on board, and it was incredible in terms of career acceleration. So, I went from facilitating training, some instructional design for a core audience, to zooming all the way out and building a strategy from nothing. So from scratch, we to go in and do all of the analysis on what was really required. And it wasn't just one software application, it was building a strategy for 60 plus software applications for the entire hospital. And then understanding how to bring on the trainers, find the right subject matter experts to actually make it happen and execute. So the 2 years, just nonstop, it was a great experience. I was living in the Middle East. It was fantastic. And I also, because we had a we had a network from Kaiser of trainers who taught some of these software systems, we were able to bring folks that we knew already. So I had spent a year working and living and playing with some of my best friends that I had made previously, who joined us for this project at the end of it to deliver that experience, and it was fantastic. So at the end of that, I had the opportunity to stay in healthcare IT, but I actually decided that wasn't what I wanted. I loved that experience, and I wanted to do that anywhere, everywhere. I wanted to broaden my scope to really any industry, any organization. So I stepped back and I sort of took a leap to start to look at what else was out there, and I joined a consultancy in Dubai, doing sort of bespoke training, development and facilitation for really anyone, just sort of, consultancy. So I was their training consultant, so I did proposals as well. So I had, again, so now it was all soft skills. So I moved from IT sort of application training, not tech support, but end user training, to soft skills facilitation and development. So communication, leadership, team building exercises. And that was really fun. And then I had an opportunity to go back into the tech world, but for not healthcare, aviation. So that was fantastic. I was a digital adoption lead for a massive digital transformation that Etihad Airways was doing in partnership with IBM. And so I had an opportunity to go there, and I was the only person, I was a one-person team responsible for a focus on learning. And that was actually a huge challenge because I was working within an IT team. And it was the first time that I was sort of on my own, I think without support, without other folks who were focused on learning. And so that was a challenge in lots of ways. Culturally, the working culture there was very different. Support-wise, it was really challenging to advocate for what I needed. And so, but it was great. Again, every experience has been a learning experience, and I loved that I had that sort of ability to influence adoption at the level that I did. And then I came back to the States. Life just brought me back, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do. I joined a SaaS company for some time, doing some product training, creating training for a product, and then I found my way here to where I am currently with Se1. We are sort of building. I helped build the function here from the ground up. I was hired as a contract instructional designer to support some critical programs, and then made it, sort of advocated for myself, and I declared that I wanted to lead the learning organization, and now I do. So
Brilliant.
Sort of my trajectory. A little bit zigzaggy, but I do feel very much like I used to say I was a generalist in that I could do all of it, so I do still love to facilitate training. I still very much develop training as well, learning, curriculum, and then now, of course, I'm leading strategy, organizational strategy around learning.
That's you're right. It's quite a zigzaggy career, and interesting. I was gonna say that the reason that your cat made an entrance into the background was probably because as cats do, they're thinking, I taught her everything she knows, and here she is taking all the credit. Yeah,
for sure.
And yeah, sure. I mean, so you kind of went from like really tech into soft skills, which would have been it must have been quite a big leap from going into kind of quite technical, hands-on, quite kind of transactional training into something that's a little bit kind of like, I suppose, less tactile, requires a lot of different emotions, empathy, all sorts of new kind of I suppose, mental models and approaches. I mean, how did you find that transition? I mean, was it an easy one, or did you kind of struggle a little bit at that stage?
It wasn't hard for me, but I like speaking. I like teaching. So I'm not one of the 96% or whatever that statistic is now that is afraid of speaking more than I'm afraid of death. I actually really enjoyed being in front of a classroom, and so the transition itself wasn't challenging because I really wanted to do it. I was really excited to talk about things like communication and how we communicate with each other. I was really excited about personal development and growth, and so it wasn't challenging in that way because I wasn't. I mean, I know a lot about healthcare IT, but it wasn't like I'm so passionate about this work. So standing up day after day teaching someone how to use the software system was kind of got boring for me after a while. But growth and development is nonstop. It's continuous, and so each class is different. Each cohort is different. And you're right. I don't think the empathy changes necessarily because there's challenges with any training, facing different types of learners, those who are really engaged, those who are like really resistant. All of that exists in all scenarios. But for me, I didn't find it too challenging because, like I said, I was so excited to learn about these things and to teach them. And it was great for me socially. I would say, even though I say I like to speak and teach, I'm not really someone who initiates. So I wouldn't be that person that comes up to you and says, "Hey, hi, Jason, nice to meet you. I'm Zainab." Usually I sit back and assess the scene and then maybe engage or I'm pulled in. Once you get me talking, I can't stop. But it's definitely that initial, and then so I had to overcome that a little bit personally as the facilitator, as a leader in the classroom, and I noticed that I made an effort to make sure that I was doing that, but otherwise I really loved it. I loved each class. I loved understanding sort of where people were coming from, and like I said, in this case it's very different. In terms of learning and application, you do have very specific goals that you can meet. It's also much easier to measure that versus some of the intangible things like growth.
And I've always been fascinated by as someone who's kind of traveled and worked across different countries and trained people, from US to the Middle East, how much in your experience does different cultures change the learning landscape?
It changes it quite a bit. I think that was also part of the challenge, which I loved. But it was incredible to be in a room of people from literally all over the world. The UAE is, I don't know this is statistic anymore, but at the time it was about 87% expats, meaning people from all over the world, not local to the Emirates. And so that means my classroom would have people from all over the world. And most of them were not, there's another cameo, I apologize. Most of them.
When she starts setting fire to the kitchen that we'll worry. Yeah.
I'm so sorry. I had a classroom full of people from all over the world, and most of them were not native language speakers, English language speakers, often. And so that was also a challenge. And cultural norms are different across the world. So some cultures are less likely to speak up and participate and engage as much. They prefer to be called on. For example, they struggle. I would teach presentation skills, for example, courses, and that was challenging because that's really hard for people. Not for me, but it's very, very hard for people. There's so much that goes on there, and so I also would, I had a group. I had a group of Emirati women, all Emirati women. In one of my courses, I was teaching business writing to this group of women who, again, are not native English speakers. And that was a really unique and fun experience, but it was incredible to be sort of brought into their sphere and to gain their trust and, help them go through this experience. It was 2 days. And so I had some really great experiences. I think it's something that I'm aware of now when I assess an audience, to think about sort of where they might be coming from. Even in the States, I live in California. It's quite diverse here. We do have people from all over. And I keep that in mind now as well when I'm sort of designing. And then it just kind of broadens my idea of just the learner, like who the learner could be, and what are some of the considerations we need to think about when we're designing.
Well, that's really interesting. I guess the other thing that I'm kind of really curious about with all of this kind of movements and transitioning into different industries in different regions is just how you've perceived over the last kind of few years. Have you seen kind of just learning and development generally, the kind of approach to it, the awareness of it, the acceptance of it change at all, or has it largely kind of stayed the same in terms of how organizations see this role?
Yeah, one of the biggest challenges I had earlier in my career was this understanding how important learning and development is, and yet not seeing that outside of the learning and development teams, not seeing that emphasis and importance. And I always struggled with that. It was always like this, like I'm screaming to be heard, I'm screaming to be valued, to show my value. And I'm really fortunate now to be in a place where learning is valued. And how do we value learning is we invest in learning. And so I sort of declared a while back that I wanted to work for organizations that valued learning, because I was tired of coming in ready to make an impact and then being really disempowered or feeling just unheard, all of those things that happen because learning is kind of an afterthought for a lot of organizations, or sort of a nice to have, or the investment in it. I think there's lots of misconceptions about how learning is created, the impact of learning, how we measure value, and then how do we articulate that value higher up. That's always been a challenge. So for me, I have seen a shift. I think people are realizing more than ever that learning has to be embedded in your culture. It needs to be a continuous thing. It's not a one and done for individual skills gaps or tools trainings or anything like that. It's sort of, we have to keep up with the pace of change, and the only way to do that is to create a culture of continuous development, continuous learning. And I see that now more and more, for sure. I've seen that shift from where I was previously to where I am now. I'm really fortunate to be in a place where I felt like it is a focus. For example, I'm in an organization where workforce development is a huge strategic priority for the next 5 years. And you cannot have workforce development without, learning, right? That's literally what it means. It says people development. And so I'm fortunate to be in a place now where that focus is that is understood, and that not just learning is not just important for people to gain the right skills, but also for people to engage more deeply with their organizations, to stay, right? To be happy and fulfilled in the work they do. It's really important. We learn that over and over. And when people leave, a lot of times they're leaving because they don't see opportunities for growth. And that's really the only reason I've left any role or job, other than contract work where it's a set time. I've done consulting, etc. But if I've ever left organizations, it's because I wasn't growing in the way that I wanted, or I wasn't feeling challenged. And so I know that to be true myself personally.
Yeah. So I can imagine that there are a lot of learning and development people, and I say this carefully because I'm not one of them. But I suppose we actually all are. I need to check myself on that. But who may not know, what a learning culture is and what it looks like. And I'm fascinated because you said I made a decision in my career that I was going forward, I was only going to be working in organizations where there's a learning culture. So how do you know that you're going to be entering an organization that has a learning culture? What are the kind of symptoms, behaviors, properties, what does it look like? How do you smell a rat?
Yeah, so it wasn't that I said I want to go into an organization that has a culture of learning. What I specifically said was I want to work for organizations that value learning
Okay.
Meaning that
Yeah.
if they value learning, then they are willing to invest in learning to develop those cultures of learning. So what it looks like, and I've been, again, very fortunate to land in a place where I've been able to develop that culture of learning, and it looks like continuous development. It looks like lots of opportunity for asynchronous learning, just-in-time learning, for exactly like the right information at the right time that you need for your role to succeed. So, building up that. And then it also looks like communities of learning. So it looks like cohorts of like-minded folks. So either, similar roles or similar challenges, folks learning together. I think it has to have, it's sort of a culture of all of the types of learning. So, it's sort of this idea that you have access to the right information, the right types of learning, the right types of development opportunities for you. That there's plenty of that there. It looks like a focus on leadership development, a focus on the challenges that employees face throughout sort of the life cycle of employee development at different points. It looks like people being excited to join learning events, so high attendance on things. It looks like fun. Also, it looks like something that is valued. So some examples I'll give you is we'll have like a new employee orientation that we completely redesigned from the ground up, because in the pre-COVID we would bring everyone in and they would sit in a half-day sort of lecture style with leaders speaking at them, and then have sort of a social social lunch with these leaders. And it was fine. I went through that because I joined pre-COVID, and it was okay. I definitely saw room for improvement. Obviously, I'm very critical as both a facilitator and designer. And then so when COVID hit, I was in this position to lead the learning team, and we took over redesigning that experience into a virtual experience. And we made it really as interactive as we could. We really tried to, we went through a design thinking workshop and just started from scratch. And we just said, we're not going to convert one-to-one. And we were empowered to do that. I think a lot of organizations would just be like, no, just get it done. But we went through a process where we said, no, we want to touch base with everyone who actually touches new hires. We want to look at what the process is, what the experience is, not just for this one event where they come and join the orientation. But what is their process to get there? What are they experiencing before they even get there? And how can we make that sort of a seamless experience, for them? And so we did a lot of work around that, and then the event is really well received, well attended. We get great feedback, and also it's our CEO and our Chief People Officer also join every single one, and so that's also indicating again that they value a culture of this learning, right? That it's important to them, that they see folks and that they see folks growing and developing. So I think that's what it looks like. It's sort of just continuous improvement, continuous offerings of types of learning and types of development opportunities.
And how are you guys looking at kind of taking all this amazing work that you've now done with the onboarding? I love, by the way, that you use design thinking in that process, and starting to tackle some of the new challenges that you're starting to see on the road ahead, and it may be anything from just how to kind of incrementally innovate what you've done, all the way through to how to tackle with some of these kind of challenges that people are saying are coming through this future of work, where the kind of the superpower of the future is going to be how adaptable organizations are and how adaptable the people working for them are, and how the kind of skills that are going to be prized are things like critical thinking and creativity, and things that are notoriously difficult to teach people. I'm curious how are you guys doing stuff in that space?
Yeah, so we are starting off on that journey of figuring that out. So we really tackled some of the immediate needs first. We started with onboarding because it had to be done. With COVID, there was nothing. It kind of destroyed our entire strategy of how we were approaching that.
You weren't alone.
Right, and then we started to We also have a few like key talent segments that we really needed development support because they are critical to our business, and we were losing people as fast as we were hiring them, and we were also in a position where some of these talent segments, we have more work than we actually can bid because we don't have enough people. So it was really critical in that way. If we can scale up and we can develop more people to manage this work, then we can get more work and we can continue to grow. And so we've really been focusing on some of that initially for the last few years, and now we're really getting into those skills for future of work. So we have really come to a point where we're also at a critical growth stage. So we're looking at what are the skills that got us here, that made us really successful. What has really worked for me when I'm thinking about design thinking, that really worked in developing this program. So now we're looking at what are the skills we're going to need to grow in the way we want to grow. So, what are the skills we're going to need going into this new future of what work looks like? Mm-hmm. And so our challenges are really around this hybrid workforce. We, around definitely this change, resilience, things like that. So we are working on creating a leadership development program, and when we say leadership development, we look at you're a leader at any level, so it doesn't mean you're a people manager, and looking at those skills, trying to identify what those leadership mindsets are that got us here, and what are the mindsets that will sort of accelerate our growth into the future. And once we define that, then we will go forth and create an experience that includes sort of, again, that continuous learning. It's a holistic model, so it incorporates asynchronous learning, coaching, community cohorts, etc. And so we're just kind of early stages of that, but I know, I lean on the things that I know have worked really well for us, which is, like I said, so design thinking worked well in that situation. So now we're looking at enabling our managers, our frontline managers. How do we get them up to speed? And so we've done a series of design thinking sessions, and we have a focus group of managers from across the organization. So we are validating with the business that we're designing for. So we're validating with our audience, our target audience, experienced managers across the org, also new managers, to understand what challenges they face, what are they facing now, how does that play out, what do they think their employees are feeling and thinking, and doing that, going through the empathy map, right, in design thinking. And so, and that's been really great because it makes us feel like we are moving in a way that will create sustainable impact. Again, we're not just doing what we think is best from a learning and development perspective because we've done all the research and we have a membership to Gartner and we do all these things, right? We've got all this knowledge and we do think we know, and we kind of present that, but we also create opportunity for our for folks to be involved. And like I said, validating with a business has been really critical. And so we move slower, but when we move much more intentionally, and we know that those things will stick. And I think that's the key. And so again, very lucky to be in that space. Coming from a tech space, you don't have that luxury necessarily. When you're in a startup environment, you're go, go, go. And again, learning is not really valued in the same way, or in a lot of spaces. And so you don't have that opportunity to say, wait, we want to take a second and think about how this really will work for us, how we can do it in a way that will work for us long term to get us where we need. And so,
yeah, I think it's a big challenge. I think you're right in the startup world it's kind of interesting because on one hand I've always been kind of stuck on this is there's a lot of value in basically, and I don't personally like this term, but moving fast and breaking stuff, right? Which is like one of the kind of generic terms used to describe the startup world, versus kind of taking a more considered approach and being strategic and thoughtful in how you do things. But obviously I suspect that somewhere in between probably lies a little bit of a kind of a challenge. Is some people might kind of see the slow steady approach as being impactful, but maybe not being able to kind of move at the speed that modern kind of organizations need to move at to keep up with their competitors and keep their competitive advantage. So there's not really a question here. I'm just making an observation from what I've heard, because I ponder this all the time. Being in a startup and having been in the kind of large corporate world and having had this duality, I always try and see. I always live this both and kind of existence of saying,
Yeah.
what did both of those kind of tell me? But I guess the interesting part, and what I'd really like to kind of chat to you about, because you've had all of this experience, is, you know, looking at the industry as it stands now, looking at all of these kind of macro factors that are kind of affecting business and in the same way affecting kind of learning and development. What do you, I mean, if you put yourself into the shoes of learning and development managers, what are you seeing as the biggest challenge in the next kind of year or two that a lot of learning and development departments or companies are going to have to try and overcome?
That's a good question. I've been thinking about this because I'm thinking about like what are the challenges we're facing, and honestly, what are the things that come up for us. So, measuring learning impact is always and will always be a challenge, especially for soft skills. That's always going to be an issue, a concern, and that's always challenging to do, and not just measuring it, but also, like I said, articulating the impact so that you can continue to advocate for added value, right? Continued value, continued investment in learning. So I think that's just kind of standard across the board. But I think in the next couple of years, AI is going to be huge. It will. I know that for sure. We're talking about how, we jokingly talk about how AI will just replace instructional designers. I don't think that's the case. But I do see a world where, there's this focus on working smarter, not harder. How do we utilize these tools? Mm-hmm. And so, if creating a script takes you 5 minutes versus 5 hours, that's definitely going to change the way that you look at how quickly you can move and develop and deliver programs, for example. And I think we're all concerned about that, like make us obsolete. The robots will make us obsolete. But I have those conversations. I actually met with my team, and I shared a video that was recently going around LinkedIn around ways instructional designers can use LinkedIn, or AI rather, ChatGPT. And we had a discussion around that. We found a great article as well. We had a discussion around that, and it was really interesting. And it was great to articulate, for them to be able to express that concern about it, and call it out. It's an elephant in the room. We're all worried that our jobs will be replaced by the robots, and so that's one of the things I think. We have to see how that's going to impact our industry, how people are going to rely on that, how companies will, what emphasis companies will put on that, and I'm not really sure. I'm still waiting to see how it kind of lands. What else? I think hybrid and remote learning will always be a challenge, because we're never going back. I know lots of companies have kind of tried to go back to full in office, but I don't think that. I think the world has shifted, and I'm not sure. I'm not sure we're doing enough to support that type of work model. And so, how does that work? How do you retain talent that's distributed, and then how do you continue to provide the same opportunities? All these great things that I'm talking about that we're developing, how do we provide those same opportunities for folks that are in the office and folks that are not in the office, so that they feel adequately supported?
Yeah, I think that's you're spot on. I think those are two very, very real challenges. I do think I don't think the AI is going to fundamentally take people's jobs away, but I think it's going to change the nature of the work that they do. And I think it's the greatest automation the greatest automation kind of evolution that we've kind of seen probably in since the Industrial Revolution, and look at how that changed the society, and I think it's back then, if you were the guy who screwed the cap onto the toothpaste, yes, your job was probably at risk, but you then evolved into something else, and I think that's very much what we're going to hopefully start seeing is this kind of human AI intelligence, is where people start working with AI and doing incredible stuff. Or at least that's what I hope is the case.
Yeah, I think a lot about how how our roles will evolve with AI, and what are the areas that we can start to develop ourselves in, what skills, and really it's the human aspects of our roles. It's our human, the interconnectedness that we have with the roles that we work with, the relationships that we build with our stakeholders and subject matter experts. And right, we're going to have to really dig into what is the value that we really bring.
I think there's a lot about human connection and empathy. I mean, I can imagine that computers will at some day be able to kind of mirror the behaviors of empathy, but it will never be true empathy. I think that's impossible to kind of replace with technology. But
this is a fun conversation.
Yeah.
That's a good. That could be a whole other podcast. Yeah. But I agree. I think. Agreed.
So I'm gonna finish off with two questions for you. The first is, if you were to put yourself in the shoes of people in our audience and looking at the skills and the experiences that you've built over a illustrious career of doing lots of different things in different places of the world, and you were looking at someone who was new to the position or starting out or kind of facing challenges coming into a new environment, what's that one nugget of wisdom, that one piece of advice, that one kind of, man, I wish I knew this when I started out, piece of advice that you would give to people?
I've always felt in my career a little bit like an oddball, or not quite. I think, I don't want to call it imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is not real to me, but it comes up all the time. But I think as someone who's always felt a little bit outside, meaning, I'm a brown Muslim girl. I worked in tech. I was definitely a minority, right? Here, I'm definitely a minority. I think very aware of those things. I think a lot of that feeds into our ability to really show up and take space and really ground in your expertise and knowledge, like what you bring, So I would say show up, take up space, really learn how to articulate your value wherever you are in your career, how you fit into the bigger picture and how you impact the bigger picture. So show up and zoom out a little bit.
Yeah, and that's an important thing, I think, for everybody, no matter whether you're in learning and development, is it's very easy to get lost in the noise, and sometimes you've got to try and step back and put your head above the water. Brilliant advice. Right. Second question is, we always like to, on this kind of journey of continuous learning, ask our guests to share with us a recent book or a podcast, something that made an impact on you, or made you have an aha moment, or kind of some type of epiphany that you want to share with the audience.
Sure. Yeah, I'm reading a book called Your Body Is Not an Apology by Sonia Renee Taylor. She's an activist author, and it's really has given me has shifted really my mindset around just bodies, how we think about bodies, how I think about my own body, self-love. She explores this concept of radical self-love, and how that isn't just a personal journey, but also a societal journey, and how sort of radical self-love is the key to overcoming a lot of social barriers and oppression in general. So it's mind-blowing to me. It's one of the things I read recently that really has just kind of I think about a lot, and I think I'll be reading and rereading. I kind of go back and reread chapters because I'm going very slowly through it, but it's just really profound in the way she thinks about and connects our own ideas of how our own ideas about our bodies, and then how that plays into the way that we create systems, and then how do we overcome those things, actual strategies. There's even a workbook that it comes with the book. I haven't started that yet, but I'm excited to, so that she's actually making it a very tangible way for you to implement, you know, what you're learning, which I love. As a learning designer, I love the fact that it comes with a workbook and strategies for you to take away. So I would recommend it. Yeah, absolutely.
Or as we like to say, applied learning. Yeah, so that's brilliant. And yeah, I think on that note, thank you so much for joining us, Zainab. It was really interesting to find out more about your diverse experience and the lessons that's kind of taught you along the way. And I think there's a lot of valuable little nuggets of wisdom in there for other people to pick up and learn from, especially because there's a lot of complexity in this new learning and development landscape and a lot of challenges. It's not an easy road ahead. So thank you for sharing your wisdom and experience with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really great to chat with you, Jason.
All right, and big thank you to your cat as well for the guest appearance. We often aren't lucky enough to have, you know, kind of special guest appearances on this podcast. So big fan.
Yeah, you'll be, you know, I call them the divas because they're named after Diana Ross and Celine Dion.
Okay.
So not surprised that they decided to show up, and they're following my advice of taking up space and showing up. So
brilliant. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and yeah, it's been a real pleasure.
Likewise. Take care.
Hey, thanks so much for joining us for this episode of Impact Learning Visionaries. If you found it interesting or helpful, please subscribe by clicking on the button down below so you don't miss our next one. Also, be sure to check out our Reality Bites blog for more information on how technology is aiding in learning development. Links are all in the description below. Go check it out. Thanks a lot. Bye.